UGC Requiem here. We are talking about Goryo's As Foretold. This is a list that Tom Medvec top aided a SCG Classic event several weeks back. He ended up top 16, I think, getting ninth place at another one just a week or two ago. This deck is something that is elite in my opinion. If you look back, I've had videos on a similar deck in the past that I was trying to get to work where basically I was playing the package of Goryo's Vengeance, Kiki-Jiki, Deceiver Exarch, and some Simian Spirit Guides, Faithless Lootings, things like that. But the plan was to be able to and Grizzlebrands rather, was to be able to Goryo's Vengeance either Grizzlebrand or Kiki-Jiki, and pair that with Deceiver Exarch for the Kiki-Jiki for a combo win, or use Grizzlebrand to draw the cards to get you to set up a combo win either via setting up a Kiki-Jiki Deceiver Exarch and that supported with some sort of backup, or just be able to basically cycle Grizzlebrands, loop Grizzlebrands turn after turn, and then also pair that with Jace Vryn's Prodigy, because Jace has a really neat interaction with Goryo's Vengeance where if you flip it, Goryo's Vengeance gives a creature haste. If you flip the Jace while it's on the battlefield from a Goryo's Vengeance doesn't recognize the Planeswalker as the original Jace, and therefore you get to keep it beyond that. So short story long, a lot of really cool things that I've liked in the past. I've played with in the past, the Izzet Charms, etc. What's changed? Why is he doing well with it now? The key thing here is As Foretold, Living End specifically, but also Ancestral Vision, the suspend card. So let's start off by talking about As Foretold. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a time counter on As Foretold. Once each turn, you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a spell you cast with converted mana cost X or less, where X is the number of counters foretold. So what that means is, you add a counter every turn. It's kind of like Aether Vial, except that you get to cast things for X or less, where Aether Vial has to be exactly X. So if there are 3 counters on As Foretold, you can cast spells that are 3 or less. And not just non-creature spells, any spell. Now, the interaction with Living End and Ancestral Vision are they're 0 CMC spells, or they don't have a CMC on them, and so basically they're able to be cast as a 0 CMC spell. There's no mana cost to pay. Now, that means you have to bypass the paying a blue and waiting 4 turns, or paying 4 mana and waiting 3 turns, isn't the case with Living End. Now, there's certainly plenty of games where you still just want to Ancestral Vision, certain matchups, pay the blue right off the bat, and draw cards 4 turns later. Sometimes you win before that happens, sometimes you lose before that happens, but it's a thing. So, the key thing here, though, is that both of these cards can be cast as soon as you cast an As Foretold, which means you can do silly things like use Faithless Looting, which is draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, to turn 1 pitch a Deceiver Exarch and a Kiki-Jiki. Then turn 2, presuming you have 2 lands, one of which produces blue mana, you can use those plus a Simian Spirit Guide to cast As Foretold, and then cast a Living End off your As Foretold immediately, recurring Deceiver Exarch and Kiki-Jiki to the battlefield, and then creating as many 1/4 Exarchs as necessary to kill your opponent. So that is kind of the nut draw, if you will. Now, there is also kind of other things you can do in that regard. So you could also Faithless Looting, pitch a Kiki-Jiki, and once you pitch a Kiki-Jiki on your opponent's end step, if you have the mana, Goryo's Vengeance your Kiki-Jiki back. If you Goryo's Vengeance at your opponent's end step, it does not, the Goryo's Vengeance exile piece does not exile your creature until the beginning of the next end step, which would be your end step. And so then if you have the mana, you can turn 3, just cast a Deceiver Exarch and create as many 1/4 Exarchs as to defeat your. Then there are also obviously the whole thing with Faithless Looting, you can pitch at Griselbrand, hit Griselbrand, attack, draw 7 to 14 cards. Sometimes you can use Griselbrand as a blocker, so bring Griselbrand in as a blocker, draw, kill the opponent's creature, draw 7, 14 cards, whatever. Set up a win for yourself by drawing into the cards you need to do the As Foretold combo. You can often Simian Spirit Guide, the Faithless Looting, so that you can cast As Foretold with a Living End. Again, you can also As Foretold to cast, or with As Foretold cast Ancestral Vision. You can actually cast any card in your deck so long as there's enough counters on As Foretold. So other kind of fun interactions, Goryo's Vengeance, as I kind of mentioned with Jace Vryn's Prodigy. If you can activate Jace and meet its criteria of having 5 or more cards in the graveyard, it will flip and become Jace Telepath Unbound, which is a Planeswalker, and now does not get exiled at end step. Also, if your Kiki-Jiki dies, it doesn't get exiled at end step. Same with your Griselbrand. If the Griselbrand doesn't die, typically it gets exiled. But what you can do in certain situations is you can actually play out your Kiki-Jiki Deceiver Exarch combo with Living End, and if you have mana up, if they can Lightning Bolt your Kiki-Jiki, you could Goryo's Vengeance the Kiki-Jiki back to the battlefield and combo again. Or you can go for the combo, have your, say you already have an Exarch in the graveyard, you can go for your combo by hard casting Kiki-Jiki, they kill it, you then cast your Living End into your As Foretold to win that way. There's a bunch of just ways you can just kind of win, which is nice. One thing I'd like to try with the deck, I just don't know quite where to put the slot. I tried it in the sideboard for a little bit, and it's okay, but it's kind of like it's like trying to strengthen how fast you can win out of the graveyard when your opponents are going to be hating on your graveyard. Is Conflagrate, which pairs really well with Griselbrand, because you can attack with Griselbrand, gain 7 life, draw 14 cards, and then if you have the ability to cast Conflagrate off like a couple Simian Spirit Guides, you can throw like 14 cards at your opponent to essentially do 21 damage to them between Griselbrand and the Conflagrate. So another thing I'd like to try. The other key thing with Jace Vryn's Prodigy is Jace Vryn's Prodigy is the Planewalker, has the down tick of -3, so you may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn. If that card would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So one cool thing, well, 2 cool things you can do is, one, you can Goryo's Vengeance your Jace from the graveyard, flip it, and then on your next turn immediately use that same Goryo's Vengeance to cast Griselbrand, whatever. Or to not cast it, but to recur it from the graveyard. The other thing you can do, though, because it specifically says you may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn, it doesn't give flashback like Snapcaster Mage. Those cards are not able to cast Ancestral, or Snapcaster Mage cannot cast Ancestral Vision or Living End from the graveyard. Jace, however, can if, and there's a key thing here, if you have an As Foretold on the battlefield. So if you have As Foretold, you can actually target Ancestral Vision or Living End and cast it through the As Foretold with Jace's down tick, which is awesome. So again, it's yet another way to recur these sweet abilities. Another thing not to be neglected is, say you have a Kiki-Jiki in the graveyard, but you have a Deceiver Exarch in hand, you can Lightning Axe. You could like cast in on your opponent's end step turn 3. This is assuming you have an As Foretold and Living End in hand, or an As Foretold on the battlefield already. You can cast your Exarch, untap your own land, use Lightning Axe to kill your Deceiver Exarch, then untap Living End, recurring your Exarch, Kiki-Jiki to the battlefield, combo win. The cool thing, I guess, about the deck is that, if your opponent hates on your graveyard, you still can just win with Deceiver Exarch, Kiki-Jiki, and so the sideboard becomes a bit more fair for some of those matchups. Really, the only sideboard cards that you're super, super concerned about is Leyline of the Void and Rest in Peace, because those exile the graveyard and don't let anything go to the graveyard. Grafdigger's Cage does stop Goryo's Vengeance, but it doesn't stop Living End at all. Living End actually says each player exiles all creature cards from his or her graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures he or she controls, then puts all the cards he or she exiled this way onto the battlefield. So Grafdigger Cage stops creatures from entering the battlefield from the graveyard and the library, but they don't enter from the graveyard, they enter from exile with Living End. So that's an interaction gets around Grafdigger's Cage. And you have enough kind of graveyard pressure between Exarch and Kiki-Jiki that you can actually pressure your opponent to, excuse me, you can actually pressure your opponent to crack relics and heal spell bombs, things like that, and then just go. You also very often can just cast your Deceiver Exarch to tap like a Nihil Spellbomb on your opponent's end step. They have to make that decision whether or not they want to crack it, and if they don't crack it, you could just win there, or if they do crack it, then you're free to start looting or Izzet Charming again. Izzet Charm is a great card in the deck because it kind of does a little bit of everything. Counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2, so this can help you, force through your combo. Izzet Charm deals 2 damage to target creature, so it's some spot removal, and then draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards at instant speed, which allows you to end step set up like a Griselbrand or Kiki-Jiki Deceiver Exarch sort of thing, and dig, which is another thing Faithless Looting does as well. But one of the cool things again is like Izzet Charm can be cast often as Foretold with 2 or more counters on it, so you can cast with your lands and then Izzet Charm through As Foretold. As Foretold lets you cast spells each turn. So again, it says on once each turn. That means you can cast it once on your turn and once on your opponent's turn. So again, just lots of cool things you do. You can cast Gorya's Vengeance off the As Foretold as well. It's just sweet. It's fun. Certainly has weaknesses, primarily the graveyard, but it's not like it's not like it's unbearable. Really, Leyline of the Void really hates on it hard, and so does Rest in Peace. But Leyline of the Void in particular requires some sacrifice on the opponent who's playing the card, because they basically get really bad draws if they don't draw it on their open, or can get really bad draws. So that said, moving on to the sideboard, the land base, mana base rather. Mana base, 7 fetches. All the fetches can get an island. So the hope here is that if you're playing against a Blood Moon deck, you can get your island so that you can cast your As Foretold. As Foretold lets you play through a Blood Moon basically. So island's your first basic if you're worried about Blood Moon. Swamp second. If you get an As Foretold down without without an island, you might still be okay. But As Foretold again allows you to cast all your stuff based on the number of counters, lets you kind of play around Blood Moon. So beyond the 7 fetches, you have a pretty standard stock mana base. So again, you would typically fetch for island first, and then Blood Crypt second, and then as needed from there. Make sure that you're keeping in mind that you might hard cast Kiki, which requires 3 red mana at some point. A couple fast lands, Inspire Bluff Canal, and Blackcleave Cliffs, and then a Cascade Bluffs, which is again a way to cast Izzet Charm and or Kiki-Jiki, when you're sitting on a, say you have a Blackcleave Cliffs and a Cascade Bluffs, right? Or whatever, like a Mountain of Cascade Bluffs. It just gives you ways to filter that into Izzet Charm mana or help you cast your. I also do run a 1 of Tolaria West. It has blue mana, but it has this ability Transmute 3. Transmute 1 blue rather. And so you can discard this card, search your library for a card with converted mana cost 0, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Transmute only as a sorcery. So this allows you to go find Living Ends or Ancestral Visions. Finding a Living End can be really huge in certain matchups. Sometimes you might go get an Ancestral Vision if you have the mana because you need a Gorya's Vengeance specifically to win, sort of thing. But typically you're going to be going to get a Living End with it. It also can be cut in a lot of the aggressive matchups from the sideboard. So that is the main deck. It's fun. Again, I didn't create it. I definitely had a deck that I was playing for a while that was very similar, but at the time we did not have Ancestral Vision or As Foretold. So definitely never considered the interaction with Living End, but part of that was because As Foretold didn't exist back then. That said, super fun deck. Sideboard, Ceremonious Rejection, Dispel, Negate. One of the worst decks matchup-wise for this is Eldrazi Tron. The Chalice on 0 is pretty brutal, and that'll often buy them time. Sometimes you get a Chalice on 2 as well. And so, on the play, this can stop a Chalice on 0, or later in the game on 0. Which is also why we're running Rakdos Charm, Abrades, Ingot Chewers. So we have essentially 4 artifacts, destruction spells, Ceremonious Rejection. The reason we're running Abrade and Rakdos Charm, they do dual duties, even though 2 CMC is something that we might see with a Chalice. Often players in the dark are going to do a Chalice on 1. Once they know what we're doing, they're either going to go Chalice on 0 or Chalice on 2. And that's where the Ingot Chewer comes in. Ingot Chewer has a evoke cost of a single red, and when the creature enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact. So the cool thing with Ingot Chewer is you essentially can cast it for 1 mana, but when it goes on the stack, it's 5 CMC, so Chalice wouldn't counter it. And so it allows you to get a Chalice, early or just before you need to go off. It also, part of the reason I'm playing Ingot Chewer over what Tom Medvec had was just because it pairs well with Living End. So it's just like another way, like you can use it to blow up an Ensnaring Bridge, and then Living End, it comes back and blows up another Ensnaring Bridge sort of thing. So that, and the fact that it just, again, it can play through Chalice on 0, 1, or 2. Part of why we got the Ingot Chewers. Abrade and Rakdos Charm, again, they have artifact destruction, but Abrade can also be used against aggro decks, and Rakdos Charm can also be used, among other things, against Storm, anything you're trying to hate on your opponent's graveyard. The deck is kind of a little weak to other graveyard decks that might be as fast or faster, and so it's possible this deck needs a little more graveyard hate, but right now we're just running the Rakdos Charm and some counter magic. We're kind of leaning on Gates, Dispels, and Izzet Charms to help against those graveyard style decks. Collective Brutality, again, helps against aggro, burn. I prefer the 4 Collective Brutality. So Tom Medvec had 2 different things going on in his list. First time he ran 4 Leyline of the Voids and only a couple of Brutalities. Second time he ran the 4 Collective Brutalities. I definitely prefer that. Leyline, or not Leyline of the Void, Leyline of Sanctity. Leyline of Sanctity is a really strong card in certain matchups when you draw it, but like I don't know, I feel like in those matchups you definitely have to draw it, and if you don't draw it, then you're probably in trouble. And so I guess my thing is Collective Brutality in the same sort of matchups for most of those matchups, which we're talking about like Storm, Burn, Valakut. I feel like Collective Brutality does a fairly similar job, but has more game against other decks as well. So the Collective Brutalities are good against Collective Company decks, but they're obviously great against Burn. They can go rip Escape Shift from the Titan Shift player. They can also kill a Goblin Electromancer and rip a Gifts Ungiven, whatever, right? So Collective Brutality kind of covers all those slots and can be used in other matchups as well. Plus, one of the things that I like about it is it's really good against control decks as a duress mode when you're trying to force a combo through. And so I personally like the Collective Brutalities over the Leyline of Sanctities, but I can totally see why people might want the Leyline of Sanctities. It definitely is a little bit stronger against Storm and Valakut, but I personally just kind of lean towards the Brutalities. Tom Medvec also was running a couple Engineered Explosives. I cut those, one, because they're really expensive right now. They're good against they're good against Chalice when it's not on 0, and they're also really good against certain aggro decks and Death Shadow style decks. And so while this deck might be a little weak to Shadow, my thought here was I want to make sure that I can beat Chalice on 0, and so I went with Ingot Chewers, emphasizing the extra artifact hate there. And then for aggro decks, I just kind of loaded up on Anger of the Gods. So, you know, I think he had a post deck or post tournament kind of primer about his deck, and one of the things he mentioned was that the worst matchups for the deck were, you know, Dredge, Eldrazi Tron, Humans, Infect, I think like Hate Bears. And so, like, all these decks, I'm just like, well, Anger of the Gods is pretty. I went more with that. Now, maybe that makes more of the matchups that, you know, he considers strongly favored a little weaker, but that's the route I went. That's the deck that I'm playing. I will get some videos up for it. Hopefully you enjoy. I certainly enjoy playing it. It doesn't always work the way you hope it works. Sometimes you just kind of clunk out, but often you just kind of you dig and catch your opponent off guard, or set up scenarios where, you know, you basically can force it through regardless of what your opponent thinks they can do. So that's all. Have a good one.